Hi everyone, I am back for another review and I will be talking about another James Bond movie, For Your Eyes Only. It stars Roger Moore. This came out in 1981. It stars Roger Moore, Carole Bouquet, and who was a well-known French actress, and Topol, who kind of gained some fame with some movies. And Roger Moore, as well as by this point in 1981, Roger Moore was well established with James Bond, having played the part since 1973 when he debuted in Live and Let Die. And this movie is essentially, they're following a device. You can think of it like a MacGuffin. A MacGuffin was kind of made popular with the Alfred Hitchcock movies, where in this movie, For Your Eyes Only, the ATAC, which is some sort of electronic device that's wanted by all the Cold War powers, the Americans, the Brits, the Russians, Soviets, as they were known at the time. Everybody wanted to hand on this device, but Julian Glover plays the bad guy, who's basically a billionaire and wants to sell the technology to the Russians. And James Bond's job is to stop that. This movie was a little interesting behind the scenes because Roger Moore by this point was 54 years old and wanted to retire, but was brought back at the 11th hour. And I would say this was Roger Moore at his peak Bond. By the time he retired in 1985 with Octopussy, which came out in 1983, and View to a Kill that came out in 1985, he already looked a little too old. I know a lot of people have a lot to say about that. But I would say my favorite Roger Moore era film was probably For Your Eyes Only and Octopussy, which I thought was another good movie. But a little bit about this movie. So the company that produced the Bond movies was United Artists, was suffering from financial difficulty due to the fact that they spent a lot of money on Moonraker, and also at the same time they spent a lot of money on another movie that was a flop. And in order to cut costs, they decided to make the movie earthly again rather than deal with space, which is what they did in Moonraker. And you could tell this movie kind of had some, let's just say, budget cuts, because there was no Bond car. You just saw a Lotus for like 5 minutes, and that was it, the Lotus Esprit, which was a similar one that was featured in The Spy Who Loved Me. Well, spoiler alert, in this movie they blow up one Lotus, and then they have another one, but you don't really see them a lot. So that was that. And also at the same time, there weren't many Bond gadgets in the movie. You just have a computer, and I'm not going to spoil too much on it, but the computer to describe someone, and I'll just leave it at that. But this movie is essentially like against time kind of chase, where they want to find the MacGuffin, the ATAC system, but also at the same time, there are so many things Bond has to navigate throughout. And this movie basically takes place in Europe, and he meets all sorts of people in Europe, in Italy, and he talks to a figure skater who was portrayed by Lynn-Holly, who was a well-known figure skater at the time. And this movie, I would still say, has a bit of a weaker plot, but I did think Roger Moore looked very Bond-esque in this movie, but I thought the plot was a little weak. You're basically chasing something. That was the point of this movie. But Julian Glover didn't portray the maniacal Bond villain. He portrayed a more like selfish Bond villain. That was a huge difference compared to the other Bond movies. The thing that I took away from this movie was the fact that Roger Moore wasn't really interested in the sex scenes. By the time he was a lot older, and what I found was Carole Bouquet and Lynn-Holly were a lot younger than him in both instances. But with Lynn-Holly, certainly kind of rebuffed sex once, which I thought was interesting and very un-James Bond-like, but that was the reality of the movie at the time. And the villains were unremarkable, except some of the henchmen who were kind of tough, but I liked the Live and Let Die plot a lot better compared to this. Even though I didn't think Roger Moore looked more James Bond-esque in 1973. He looked more James Bond-esque in 1981 than he did in 1973 when Live and Let Die came. I will say that it was a movie that I enjoyed. I didn't enjoy the plot, but like I said, I enjoyed Roger Moore, and I thought the Bond girls were way, way too young. But this was long before my time, so this movie was made long before I was born. So the only thing that I want to mention that I did enjoy when it came to cars was they use a Citroen, a yellow Citroen, a small car in a Bond car chase, which I thought was magnificent. No gadgets, no gizmos, no nothing, just use the car, which I thought was brilliant and a little unorthodox for a James Bond movie. But I do feel that since it was budget cuts and things like that, I do feel it was a little too cheap, but also at the same time, they certainly made the best of it. What I think my ideal Bond car chases are like more of like Daniel Craig type movies, especially Inspector and movies like that. What I will say is this movie still was good with Roger Moore, but I feel like they could have propped up a little bit, but that's just me. And I'll see you guys next time.